again, you guys, welcome back to my channel, The Poetry of Nice. This is a channel all about reselling online. So I sell on Etsy, Poshmark and eBay, and on this channel I like to share with you haul videos and sales videos so you can see what actually sold and how much it sold for, as well as tips and tricks videos. So this is going to be a tips videos if you like, and this is one that has been requested so much. So let me begin by saying I am so very sorry that it took this long for me to put it together. I just didn't get around to it. It's been at the top of my list for a while, but today I'm going to address how to tell if an item is vintage or not. So I've thought back and forth how to do this, like should I do screen shares where I show items that I've sold and talk about them? Should I, show you different things from Google search? And I decided that the best way to go about this was basically to gather a whole bunch, hence this little lot of different vintage items from my very own inventory that I have identified as vintage, and I'm basically going to take you through them. There's all kinds of different stuff from accessories like glasses and hats, mittens, through to actual clothing, that kind of stuff. And I'm basically going to take you through it. I'm going to explain why I came to the conclusion that it was vintage, and I'm going to give you a few resources in there as well that will hopefully help you on your way as well. So let's just get stuck in. There's no formal way to do this. I'm just going to show you each item and talk to you a little bit about what stood out about it to me in terms of it being an older item. Now vintage, when it comes to something like Etsy, it is defined as 20 years old or older, and that kind of gets a little bit hodgepodge when it comes to Etsy, when it comes to eBay and Poshmark. So I tend to think of a vintage item as anything that is at least like from the late 90s, which of course observes the 20-year rule, or even sometimes just kind of like tiptoeing into the early 2000s depending on the style and things like that and exactly how retro it looks. Don't forget of course that vintage and retro are two different words. They are not used interchangeably usually. Vintage means an item that is actually older and therefore, has that age to it or whatever, and retro is an item that's basically designed to look like something or have the stylistic elements of a vintage piece, but it's not actually true vintage. You do have to be a little bit careful when using those things. If you're selling an item that is a vintage style, but it's actually a modern piece, Target sells plenty of things that look like they were straight out of the 90s right now. Make sure that you're letting your buyers know that it is vintage style and it is not true vintage within your description, just to make sure that nobody is disappointed. Okay, so first item. This is actually going to be in one of my upcoming haul videos, so you're getting a sneaky little peek right now, but I loved it so much I had to show it. So, I love picking up vintage collegiate wear. It's one of the things I get all season long here. I'm able to find it where I thrift, and it sells so well for me come fall and back to school time. So this is Tennessee football, or like UT Vols. It is a cropped like football style shirt, the open mesh, very like, true athletic and stuff like that. I have no idea if it was actually an athletic piece. It doesn't look like it's ever been on the field personally. And this is the brand Bike. I've sold plenty of collegiate wear, vintage collegiate wear with this on, so that's also a telltale. You start to learn your brands and you start to see what was popular at different times, and you'll start to see that kind of being reoccurring sometimes. So let's go through exactly what stood out to me about this. So first of all, let's talk about style. There's the style of the graphics, which definitely have a vintage look to them in my opinion. Here is a little bit of a close-up. They just have like the line work and things like that appear to be older, and also the style of it, like the actual crop style of it and things like that overall, does not look like something that is contemporary or recent to me. And then let's go into looking at the label. So obviously I recognize the brand, but outside of that we have elements like it is made in the USA. This is such a good indicator, or it can be, of a vintage piece. There are different places that things were made, before everything was made from China. So now some things made in China can be vintage. They could kind of edge into that like mid to late 90s tier, but often things that are made in the USA, made in Korea, made in Taiwan with the ROC, Republic of China. What else have we got? Made in West Germany is a wonderful one because that is definitely an indicator that it is before the late 80s. Made in Japan is another good one. And then I also start to look into things like made in England, made in Germany, made in Italy, made in France. Basically anything that was potentially domestically made or just wasn't made in sort of, your generic China, India, Bangladesh, that kind of thing. Those are things that you're going to want to potentially pay attention to depending on the style and the other kind of vibes, if you like, that you're getting from the piece. So this piece here is 100% polyester. Now, something that I like to look at is the fabric content. 100% polyester really doesn't tell me anything, but if I'm looking at something that's a 50-50 blend, so that would be 50% cotton, 50% polyester, known as a 50-50, that is something that could also be an indicator of it being a vintage piece, because that is just a blend that was very, very popular in sort of like the 80s and 90s, as far as I can tell. Okay, let's move on to another piece. So I want to show you this hat, this SeaWorld hat. This is from approximately the 90s as well. There's a few different things going on with this. I do love to pick up vintage hats, and this one stood out to me because of the color blocking. So color blocking meaning obviously blocks of color and whatnot. That is something that was stylistically very, very popular in the 90s and 80s as well, and that often does stand out to me. Another feature of this would be the paper tag. I love a good paper tag. It tends to be a great indicator of age as well, because most tags are fabric now. This one as well was made in Taiwan, ROC, so that is again a fantastic indicator of it being potentially an older piece. Now, when it comes to hats, collegiate wear as well, but you know, all kinds of different things, you could actually go in and try and do some research on the SeaWorld logos. Chances are that their logo, or you know, if you have an NFL team, something like that, chances are you'll be able to go in and take a look at some resources and see the logo history throughout time, and that can often help you pinpoint an exact era as well. I actually have a good resource. I think it's sportslogohistory.com. I could be wrong. I'm going to link it down in the description so I don't mess it up, and you can click from there if you want to check it out. It's totally free, but it does have some of what I just spoke about, where it's sports teams and things like that, and you can see the progression of their logo. And sometimes it's as simple as like the stinger on the wasp is like pointed in the other direction, and that's the difference from like the early 90s to the late 90s. It can be the minutiae in the logo for sure, but it's such a great resource if you have a logo in front of you to be able to actually take a look and verify exactly what you have. Okay, let's talk a little bit about glasses. So I love to sell these vintage bad boys whenever I can find them. I haven't found them in a while. But first thing is style. Like, let's just go on the style here. These are total 80s. Like, wow. They have this beautiful blush pink as well, all the way around the frames, and then this pearlescent pink. There are just some things here that really do scream 80s. Now, how do I know that they are not just something that somebody has created, you know, Urban Outfitters or whatever, to look like glasses from the 80s. The 80s is very, very popular right now stylistically. Well, I can look at the details on the inner arms and things like that. Also, I'm going to talk about this graphic right here, if you can see it. Sorry about my ring light. This is definitely this 9 to 5 graphic. I would definitely say that that has a vintage vibe to it, just again from that line art and the line work there. And I'm also looking here, and it's made in the USA. That's one of the features. So again, that is a great indicator. If it was made from China, but it looked like it should have been from the 70s or 80s, I'm going to sort of second guess it, because chances are it wasn't being made in China at that particular point in time, and it may be a reproduction or a retro item. All right, let's pick a sweater. So I mentioned about brands earlier on, about you get to know like some of the brands that kind of pop up in each era, and you kind of see them a little bit more regularly. Well, I want to also address the fact that there may be brands that you look for now as contemporary pieces, but you find the vintage labels, and you know that it's vintage simply because of the comparison basically between the newer tag and how contemporary or sleek that may look, and the older tag. So a perfect example is this Diane von Furstenberg. This is definitely an older tag. We have color blocking, we have this cursive. The newer tag I will pop right here so you can take a look at it, and you can see exactly how different it is stylistically speaking for the label design. This piece also is letting me know that it's made in Hong Kong. That, by the way, is another one that is a great indicator of a vintage piece, like manufactured a long time ago. And then we also have the style. This has a very, very chunky cable knit, hot pink, again, total kind of 80s vibes to it. Just like with sports teams and things like that as well, you can definitely go in and you can do some research on brands where you see what their label history, like not a logo history, but a label history. Again, I'm going to put another free resource down below in the description in case you want to go check it out. I believe it's the vintageclothingguild.org. Again, can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll put the correct one down in the description. And that particular website actually has a lot of different brands and shows their logo history and progression throughout the decades. It's a great place for things like, you know, Nike and Adidas and stuff like that, but it does have other ones that are sort of lesser known as well, and you can definitely go in and take a look and see what you can find out about when your piece may actually be dated. Okay, next we're going to look at a pair of mittens. So again, style, we're jumping up on style. Style is going to be the thing that catches your eye first, right? Like that's what it always is for me, is taking a look, you know, through a rack or on a table and seeing something that jumps out as being like very vintage looking. So that's what these did to me. Again, they had this kind of 70s, 80s vibe to them. Now there is some wear here as well. And sometimes these signs of wear to me are good signs. So when I'm finding vintage sweatshirts and things, I'm trying to determine, seeing, you know, little signs of age, like, you know, a little bit of fraying or rubbing off here where they've had use, or there is just like a slight age issue. Perhaps there's the very, very light kind of like yellowy browny age discolorations. Now I don't want them on my items because I have to disclose them or try and get rid of them, of course, but they do sometimes help me when I look at them to say, oh, I can tell this piece is a little bit older, as well as, if we're being real, sometimes things just smell a little bit older. And there's another indicator, like use all your senses, you know what I'm saying? So again, we have this kind of paper tag, so that is a great indicator. And I'm looking at the sort of knit inside and stuff as well. And that to me is really appearing to be a little bit older as well, just again, because of this kind of like browning to it. This particular one is made in Korea. Now the WPL, I can't speak to that very well. I always thought that you get an RN number usually, and then WPL I think is before there was RN numbers. Actually, Diane von Furstenberg had one, so let's check that. Yeah, this one has no RN number, but it has a WPL. I always thought that this was to do with wool, and I'm not going to speak to this in this video because honestly I'm not sure and I don't want to put out misinformation, but I would encourage you to go and do some of your own research on the WPL number and see what you can come up with in terms of understanding it and what that could mean for your piece. But as far as I'm concerned, that is usually a great indicator it's a vintage piece, because I believe the WPL number came before an RN number was invented, basically. Again, I urge you to do your own research, but that is just one of the other things that I will also pay attention to. All right, so two more items that I just wanted to show you. So again, I wanted to show you some more style here to do with like the geometric print and stuff. I like to sell a lot of what I call cozy grandpa sweaters, basically just vintage sweaters, but they usually have these very loud prints, and I want to talk a little bit about the print and the colors as well. You do tend to get, as far as I can tell, or you can get, I should say, very, very loud, like vivid colors and things like that. When I think of 90s and 80s and 70s and stuff like that, when I think of the pieces that are really, really sought after, I think of those very like loud, bright colors, color blocking, these kind of like very busy prints. And so sometimes that could be an indicator as well. All you have to do is Google like 90s prints, 80s prints, 70s prints, and you're going to get an idea aesthetically of what you are sort of keeping your eyes peeled for. So this is one of my favorite vintage labels I've ever found. I don't know anything about the brand, but it's the Wild Hair, and I just thought it was so cool. Now this one here is actually kind of like all embroidered on, and again, you're looking at like quality and the way that they would have done things a long time ago potentially, and to me that's a great sign of something older. And again, paper tag, I love the paper tag because it really gives me a good indicator. Made in the USA, again, this one does have an RN number, and it's 100% acrylic. Acrylic is a fabric content that I have found a lot when it comes to these vintage grandpa style sweaters. That tends to be something that they had used there in the sort of 70s, 80s and whatnot, and so that's another thing potentially to pay attention to. I will say, you can probably tell from this video, for me, trying to find out if something is vintage is a very like holistic process. It's not just as simple as being like, oh, it's made in the USA, therefore it must be vintage. It's just not that easy, unfortunately. It's really taken into consideration, you know, the way that an item looks, the way that it feels in the fabric content. What does the label look like? What are the graphics? What are the color combinations? And then into that also comes like brand and where an item is made and things like that. But overall, it really is looking at it holistically. Okay, the last item that I'm going to show you as an example is this piece. So again, we're looking at style and we're looking at the color blocking and things like that. It has a fleece plaid body with this nylon windbreaker style arm. I love a good windbreaker as well. They sell so well, especially when they are cool like this one. And so what I also want to talk about this one is actually made in China. It's made in Bangladesh. This is what I wanted to show you. But you can tell that we have some, like, you know, definitely older style graphics here, and then we're looking at the style of it as a piece as well. So I'm not letting the Bangladesh thing fool me, only because we have like shoulder pads, we have all of the color blocking, we have a very, very distinct style that was very, very popular in the 90s. And so I am comfortable listing this as a vintage piece. Now, I wouldn't try and guess exactly when it's from in terms of, you know, it's early 90s, late 90s or whatever, early 2000s. I would simply say it's a vintage piece, and I would let all of the other stuff speak for itself. But yes, I'm happy overall, sort of signing my name to this being a vintage piece because of all those different elements. And just a side note, when things have shoulder pads, I tend to look and see if they can be removed. These cannot, they're sewn in, and I will note that in my listing as well, because some people like to cut the shoulder pads out and they'll be disappointed if they can't get to them easily. All right, and that is all of the vintage items that I pulled aside to show you. And so now I'm going to invite you to put any questions that you may have down below in the comments. If I don't know the answer, I won't pretend that I do, but I will try to help, you know, with a little bit of research and stuff, and see if I can't, you know, between the two of us, come to an answer, because that's how we all learn, right? And I would like to learn too. I'm always open to learning more about vintage items because they're one of my favorite things that I get to sell while I'm reselling online. So let me know your tips and your questions down below, and I look forward to having a bit of a chat with you. All right, you guys, if you enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here and you like thrifty content, please do think about hitting that subscribe button down below. There's also a join button now next to the subscribe button. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about becoming a member of this channel, supporting it and getting some sneaky peeks and extra content as well, feel free to click that button to learn just a little bit more. You'll also notice as well that down below this video, there is now some fun thrifty themed t-shirts and things like that. So if you are looking for a way to show your thrifting pride, take a look down there and see if there's anything that catches your fancy. All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, everybody.